The metallic click of the safety being released echoed through the quiet suburban street, like a death knell. Tasha Williams froze, her hand still gripping the paper grocery bag that now seemed to weigh 1,000 pounds. The oranges she had been looking forward to sharing with her family rolled across the concrete driveway. Their bright color, a stark contrast against the gray pavement, and the black barrel of the gun pointed directly at her chest. "Don't you move another muscle. You hear me?" The voice belonged to Patricia Henderson, the HOA's newly appointed community safety officer. Her pale face flushed with adrenaline and something else, something that made Tasha's blood run cold. The woman's blonde hair was pulled back in a severe ponytail, and her uniform, crisp and new, bore the insignia of someone who had tasted authority for the first time and found it intoxicating. The autumn air carried the scent of burning leaves and the distant sound of children playing. But here, in this moment, time had stopped. Tasha's mind raced as she tried to process what was happening. 20 minutes ago, she had been at Kroger, selecting produce for the week, thinking about her students' upcoming parent-teacher conferences. Now she stood in her own driveway, a gun trained on her by a woman she had never seen before in her life. "Ma'am, I live here," Tasha said, her voice steady despite the terror coursing through her veins. She had spent 15 years as a high school principal, dealing with crisis situations, de-escalating conflicts between teenagers whose emotions ran high. But nothing had prepared her for this. "This is my house. I was just bringing in groceries." Patricia's grip tightened on her weapon, a standard-issue Glock that looked oversized in her small hands. "That's exactly what a burglar would say. You match the description perfectly. Young black female, medium build. Someone called in a break-in on Maple Street, and here you are, sneaking around houses." The accusation hit Tasha like a physical blow. Sneaking around houses. She had been walking from her car to her front door, the same path she had taken every day for the past 8 years, since she and Marcus had bought this house in Willowbrook Estates. The same house where she had hosted neighborhood barbecues, where she had delivered cookies to new residents, where she had worked tirelessly to build bridges in a community that still struggled with diversity. "I'm not sneaking anywhere," Tasha replied, her teacher's voice emerging despite her fear. "I'm Dr. Tasha Williams. I'm the principal at Jefferson High School. I've lived at 1247 Maple Street for 8 years." She gestured slowly toward the brass numbers mounted beside her front door. "That's this house. My house." But Patricia seemed to have crossed some invisible line where reason no longer applied. The gun remained steady in her hands, and her blue eyes had taken on a wild gleam. "I don't care what story you've concocted. Get on the ground, now." The command cracked through the air like a whip. Tasha's knees nearly buckled, not from compliance, but from the sheer absurdity of the situation. She was a respected educator, a woman who had dedicated her life to serving her community, and she was being treated like a common criminal in her own driveway. Across the street, Mrs. Chen peeked out from behind her curtains, her elderly face creased with concern. The sound of Patricia's raised voice had begun to draw attention from the neighboring houses. Porch lights flickered on, despite the fact that dusk was only beginning to settle over the suburban landscape. "I said get down!" Patricia's voice rose to near hysteria. "Don't make me repeat myself again." Tasha slowly raised her hands, the grocery bag finally slipping from her grip and hitting the ground with a soft thud. Apples scattered across the driveway, joining the oranges in their strange, surreal dance. "Please, ma'am. There's been a misunderstanding. If you'll just let me show you my identification." "Shut up and get down face down on the ground. Hands behind your head." The words were accompanied by Patricia taking a step closer, the gun now less than 6 feet from Tasha's body. In the growing twilight, The weapon seemed to absorb all available light, becoming a black hole that threatened to swallow everything in its vicinity. From somewhere behind her, Tasha heard the sound of a door opening, then another. The quiet residential street was awakening to the drama unfolding in the Williams family driveway. She could hear whispered conversations, the distinctive sound of cell phone cameras being activated, the shuffle of feet on concrete. "What's going on over there?" called out James Morrison from 2 houses down. He was a retired teacher himself, someone who had served on the school board when Tasha first moved to the neighborhood. His voice carried a note of disbelief. Patricia spun halfway around. The gun still trained on Tasha, but her attention momentarily divided. "Stay back. This is official HOA business. I'm conducting a citizen's arrest." The phrase hung in the air like toxic gas. Citizen's arrest. As if Patricia Henderson had any authority beyond checking for unauthorized lawn decorations and ensuring garbage cans were properly concealed. The HOA had never authorized its officers to carry weapons, let alone detain residents. But in the heat of the moment, with adrenaline and prejudice fueling her actions, Patricia seemed to believe she possessed powers far beyond her actual jurisdiction. Tasha's mind worked frantically. She needed to de-escalate this situation before it spiraled completely out of control. She had seen too many news reports, witnessed too many tragedies that began exactly like this, with a misunderstanding, a gun, and someone who felt they had the right to judge her presence in her own neighborhood. "Ma'am, I understand you're trying to keep the community safe," Tasha said, her voice taking on the calm, measured tone she used with her most difficult students. "But I promise you, there's been a mistake. If you'll just lower your weapon, we can sort this out peacefully." Patricia's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Peacefully? You people always want to talk your way out of everything. I know what I see. I know what you are." The words landed like a slap. "You people. You know what you are." The mask was slipping, revealing the ugly truth beneath Patricia's claims of community safety. This wasn't about a burglary report or mistaken identity. This was about something much deeper, much more poisonous. More neighbors had emerged from their houses now. Tasha could see them in her peripheral vision. Sarah Goldstein from next door, holding her phone up to record the scene. The Rodriguez family from across the street, their teenage son looking horrified. Elderly Mr. Peterson, who was already dialing what she hoped was 911. "Please, everyone needs to step back," Patricia shouted, sweat beading on her forehead despite the cool evening air. "This suspect is dangerous. She's been casing houses in the neighborhood." Suspect. The word felt like a physical assault. Tasha had never been called a suspect in her life. She had been an honor student, a scholarship recipient, a dedicated teacher, a beloved principal. She had spent her entire adult life building a reputation based on integrity, compassion, and service to others. And now, in the span of 5 minutes, she had been reduced to a suspect in her own driveway. "That's Dr. Williams," Sarah Goldstein called out, her voice filled with outrage. "She lives there. She's our neighbor." Patricia's head snapped toward Sarah, the gun wavering slightly. "I don't care what she told you her name was. Criminals lie. That's what they do." The situation was deteriorating rapidly. Tasha could see the conflict in Patricia's eyes, the growing realization that perhaps she had made a mistake, warring with her unwillingness to admit fault. In Tasha's experience, this was often the most dangerous moment in any confrontation, when someone had gone too far to retreat, but not far enough to feel justified in their actions. "Ma'am, my husband will be home from work any minute," Tasha said carefully. "He's a federal agent with the DEA. When he sees what's happening here, this situation is going to become much more complicated for everyone involved." It was a gamble, revealing Marcus's profession, But Tasha hoped that the mention of federal law enforcement might give Patricia pause, might make her reconsider the path she was on. Instead, it seemed to have the opposite effect. "Oh, so now you're making threats." Patricia's voice reached a new pitch of hysteria. "Threatening me with your so-called husband. That's exactly what I'd expect from someone like you." Someone like you. The phrase hung in the air like a toxic cloud, its meaning clear to everyone present. The neighbors who had gathered to witness this spectacle exchanged glances, some pulling out their phones to record, others looking around nervously, as if expecting the situation to explode into violence at any moment. Tasha felt something break inside her chest. Not her resolve. That remained solid as granite. But something else. Some faith she had carried in the basic decency of her neighbors, in the progress she thought they had made as a community. She had worked so hard to build bridges, to create understanding, to prove that she belonged here not because of her race, but because of her character. And now, in a single moment, all of that seemed to crumble. "I'm not threatening anyone," Tasha said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm just trying to go home." The simple truth of the statement seemed to hang in the air. She was trying to go home, to her own home, with groceries for her family's dinner. It was such a mundane, ordinary activity that the absurdity of the situation became almost overwhelming. Patricia's breathing was becoming labored, her face flushed with exertion and emotion. The gun in her hands trembled slightly, and Tasha realized with growing alarm that the woman was losing control of the situation and, possibly, of herself. "You don't belong here," Patricia said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper that somehow carried more menace than her earlier shouting. "This is a good neighborhood, a safe neighborhood. We don't want your kind bringing drugs and crime and violence into our community." The words were like a physical blow, each one landing with devastating accuracy. Your kind. As if Tasha's PhD in educational leadership meant nothing. As if her 15 years of dedicated service to the community meant nothing. As if her spotless record, her volunteer work, her contribution to making the neighborhood a better place for everyone meant absolutely nothing. From the crowd of neighbors, a voice called out, "Patricia, you need to stop this right now." It was David Chen, Mrs. Chen's son, who worked as a public defender downtown. His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to dealing with legal situations. "You're about to commit a serious crime. Put the gun down before you do something you can't take back." Patricia whirled toward him, the gun swinging wildly. "Don't tell me what to do. I have every right to protect this community." The crowd collectively gasped and stepped back as the weapon swept across them. Several people ducked behind cars or retreated toward their houses. The situation had moved beyond threatening a single person. Now, Patricia was endangering everyone present. "You have no right to point a gun at an innocent woman," Sarah Goldstein shouted from behind her cell phone, which was still recording everything. "Tasha has lived here for years. She's one of the most respected people in this neighborhood." But Patricia seemed beyond the reach of reason now. The power of the weapon in her hands, combined with whatever deep-seated prejudices had driven her to this point, had created a toxic mixture that was rapidly spiraling out of control. "She's playing you all for fools," Patricia screamed, spittle flying from her mouth. "Can't you see this is exactly how they operate? They move into good neighborhoods, pretend to be respectable, and then they bring in their criminal friends and family." Tasha felt tears threatening to spill from her eyes, not from fear, but from a profound sense of heartbreak. How had they gotten here? How had 8 years of being a good neighbor, a supportive community member, a positive presence in Willowbrook Estates, led to this moment where she stood with a gun pointed at her chest? The sound of a car turning into the driveway cut through the tension like a knife. Marcus's black Chevy Tahoe, the one with the small DEA decal in the rear window that most people never noticed, pulled slowly up the driveway. The headlights swept across the surreal scene, the scattered groceries, the crowd of neighbors, his wife standing with her hands raised, and a woman in an HOA uniform pointing a gun at her chest. Time seemed to slow to a crawl. Tasha watched through the windshield as her husband's face registered confusion, then shock, then a cold, professional alertness that she had only seen a few times during their 12 years of marriage. Marcus Williams was not a man who lost his temper easily, but when he did, the results were usually memorable. The Tahoe's engine shut off with a soft click. The driver's door opened with mechanical precision. Marcus stepped out, still wearing his work clothes, a crisp white shirt, dark slacks, and the subtle shoulder holster that marked him as federal law enforcement. His badge was clearly visible on his belt, catching the light from the street lamps that had begun to flicker on. "What's going on here?" His voice carried the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. It was calm, measured, but underneath ran a current of barely controlled fury. Patricia spun toward him, the gun now pointing in his direction. "Stay back. I'm conducting a citizen's arrest. This woman is a suspected burglar." Marcus took in the scene with the trained eye of a law enforcement professional. His wife, hands raised, standing in their own driveway. A woman in an HOA uniform pointing a gun at both of them. Neighbors watching in horror. Several filming with their phones. Groceries scattered across the concrete. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to lower your weapon immediately," Marcus said, his voice taking on the tone he used when arresting dangerous criminals. "I'm Agent Marcus Williams, DEA. That's my wife you're threatening, and this is our house." Patricia's eyes darted between Marcus and Tasha, confusion and panic warring on her face. "You're lying. You're both lying. This is some kind of elaborate scam." Marcus slowly reached for his badge, moving with deliberate, non-threatening motions. "Ma'am, I'm going to show you my credentials. Please keep your weapon pointed at the ground." "Don't you move!" Patricia shrieked, the gun swinging back toward Marcus. "I know what this is. You're working together. This is exactly the kind of sophisticated operation I was warned about." The suggestion that a federal agent and a school principal were running some kind of burglary ring from their own driveway would have been laughable under any other circumstances. But with a loaded weapon in the hands of someone clearly unhinged, no one was laughing. Marcus's training kicked in fully. He assessed the situation with cold professionalism, unstable subject with a firearm. Multiple civilians in the line of fire. Deteriorating mental state indicated by irrational statements and erratic behavior. The textbook response was clear. "Ma'am, I need you to listen to me very carefully," Marcus said, his voice taking on the hypnotic quality of a trained negotiator. "I understand you're trying to protect your community. That's admirable. But right now, you're pointing a weapon at a federal agent and his wife in their own driveway. That's a federal crime. I don't want to see you hurt yourself or anyone else here." From the crowd of neighbors, David Chen's voice called out, "Patricia, Agent Williams is telling the truth. The Williams family has lived here for 8 years. Tasha is the principal at Jefferson High. This is insane." Patricia's breathing was becoming more labored, her face flushed with exertion and something approaching panic. The reality of the situation was beginning to penetrate her initial certainty, but instead of backing down, she seemed to be doubling down on her position. "You're all in on it," she said, her voice taking on a conspiratorial whisper that was somehow more frightening than her earlier shouting. "This whole neighborhood has been compromised. They've been planning this for years." Marcus exchanged a quick glance with Tasha, and she saw the recognition in his eyes. This wasn't just about racism or mistaken identity anymore. Patricia Henderson was having some kind of psychological break, and that made her infinitely more dangerous than a simple bigot with a gun. The sound of sirens in the distance cut through the tension. Someone, probably Mr. Peterson or David Chen, had called 911 and help was finally on the way. But sirens could also escalate an already volatile situation. And Marcus knew they needed to resolve this before patrol units arrived with their own weapons drawn. "Patricia, listen to me," Marcus said, using her name deliberately to try to establish a personal connection. "My name is Marcus Williams. I've been a DEA agent for 16 years. My wife Tasha is the principal at Jefferson High School. We have a 13-year-old daughter named Maya who goes to Roosevelt Middle School. We've been living in this house since 2015. We're not criminals. We're your neighbors." He spoke slowly, clearly, providing concrete details that would be impossible to fabricate on the spot. Personal information that only long-term residents would know. But Patricia's grip on reality seemed to be slipping further with each passing moment. "Lies," she whispered, though her voice lacked its earlier conviction. "All lies. Sophisticated lies." The sirens were getting closer now, their wailing cutting through the suburban quiet like a blade. Porch lights continued to flick on throughout the neighborhood as more residents became aware of the drama unfolding on Maple Street. Tasha could see faces in windows, people stepping cautiously onto their front porches. The quiet residential street transforming into something resembling a crime scene. "Ma'am, when those patrol officers arrive, they're going to see a woman pointing a gun at a federal agent," Marcus said, his voice taking on a new urgency. "That's not going to end well for anyone. Please, for your own safety, put the weapon down now." Patricia's head whipped back and forth between Marcus and Tasha, then toward the approaching sirens. The weight of what she had done was beginning to penetrate her delusions, and Tasha could see the exact moment when panic began to override whatever had driven her to this point. "This isn't how it was supposed to happen," Patricia muttered, more to herself than to anyone else. "I was protecting the community. I was doing my job." Sarah Goldstein stepped forward from the crowd, her phone still recording, but her voice gentle. "Patricia, you made a mistake. We all make mistakes. But you can fix this right now by putting the gun down and apologizing to Dr. Williams." The simple humanity of the suggestion seemed to penetrate Patricia's paranoid haze. For a moment, the gun wavered, and Tasha dared to hope that the nightmare was finally coming to an end. Then, the first patrol car rounded the corner, its red and blue lights painting the suburban street in alternating waves of color. The sight of actual police officers seemed to trigger something in Patricia's mind, either a return to reality or a complete departure from it. "They're here!" she shouted, the gun swinging wildly as she spun toward the approaching vehicle. "I called for backup. I told them there was a robbery in progress." Marcus moved with the fluid grace of someone who had spent years training for exactly this type of situation. As Patricia's attention focused on the patrol car, he stepped protectively in front of Tasha, his own weapon appearing in his hand with practiced efficiency. "Patricia Henderson, you are under arrest for menacing with a deadly weapon, unlawful detention, and threatening a federal officer," Marcus announced, his voice carrying the full authority of 16 years in law enforcement. "Drop your weapon immediately and place your hands behind your head." The patrol car screeched to a halt at the edge of the driveway, its occupants taking in the chaotic scene. Two officers emerged, their own weapons drawn, trying to assess the situation quickly enough to avoid making a tragic mistake. "Federal agent," Marcus called out, holding his badge high above his head with his free hand. "Agent Marcus Williams, DEA. The suspect is the blonde female in the HOA uniform. The clarity of his identification and the obvious professionalism of his demeanor immediately established him as the authority figure the patrol officers needed to follow. They moved to flank Patricia, their weapons trained on her, while Marcus maintained his position protecting Tasha. "Ma'am, drop your weapon now," one of the patrol officers commanded. "This is your final warning." Patricia looked around wildly, seeming to realize for the first time that she was surrounded, outnumbered, and completely outmatched. The fantasy that had driven her to this point, that she was somehow the hero of this story, protecting her community from dangerous criminals, crumbled in the face of cold reality. The gun slipped from her trembling fingers and clattered onto the concrete driveway, the sound echoing through the now silent street like a gavel falling. Patricia's hands shot up above her head, and she began to sob. Great, heaving sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her chest. "I was just trying to help," she cried as one of the patrol officers moved to secure her weapon and place her in handcuffs. "Someone called about a burglary. I was just trying to protect the neighborhood." Marcus holstered his weapon and immediately moved to Tasha's side, pulling her into a fierce embrace. She could feel him trembling slightly, the adrenaline and fear finally catching up with him now that the immediate danger had passed. "Are you hurt?" he whispered into her ear, his hands running over her arms and shoulders as if checking for injuries. "Did she touch you? Did she hurt you in any way?" Tasha shook her head, unable to trust her voice yet. The terror of the past 20 minutes was beginning to give way to a different kind of emotion. Anger, pure and clean and righteous. She had been humiliated, threatened, and terrorized in her own driveway by someone who had appointed herself judge and jury based on nothing more than the color of Tasha's skin. One of the patrol officers approached them, his notepad already out. "Agent Williams, Dr. Williams, I'm Officer Rodriguez. I need to get your statements about what happened here." As Marcus began to give his account of the events, more vehicles arrived on the scene. Another patrol car, an ambulance that someone had called as a precaution, and then a news van from Channel 7 alerted by the police scanner chatter about a federal agent being threatened in Willowbrook Estates. Tasha watched as Patricia was loaded into the back of a patrol car, still sobbing and protesting her innocence. The woman looked small and pathetic now, stripped of the authority she had claimed and the weapon that had made her feel powerful. But Tasha felt no satisfaction in seeing her brought low. If anything, she felt a deep sadness for how badly things had gone wrong. Sarah Goldstein approached them, her phone still in her hand. "Tasha, I got the whole thing on video. Every word, every threat. I'm so sorry this happened to you." Other neighbors began to approach as well, offering apologies, support, and their own witness accounts. The Rodriguez family, the Chens, Mr. Peterson, even some people Tasha didn't recognize well, all expressing their shock and dismay at what they had witnessed. "Dr. Williams," said a young woman Tasha recognized as a reporter from Channel 7. "Would you be willing to comment on what happened here tonight?" Tasha looked at Marcus, who squeezed her hand supportively. She thought about declining, about wanting to just go inside and try to process what had happened. But then she thought about her students, about other families who might face similar situations, about the importance of speaking out when injustice occurred. "What happened here tonight should never happen to anyone," Tasha said, her voice stronger than she felt. "I was coming home from the grocery store to my own house, and I was threatened with a deadly weapon because someone decided I didn't belong in my own neighborhood. This isn't about a mistaken identity or a burglary report. This is about prejudice and the dangerous assumptions people make based on race." The reporter nodded, scribbling notes. What do you think should happen to Ms. Henderson? Tasha considered the question carefully. I think she needs help, professional help. But I also think there need to be consequences for what she did. No one should be able to threaten an innocent person with a gun and walk away without facing justice. As the immediate crisis wound down and the various officials finished their work, Marcus and Tasha finally found themselves alone on their front porch. The scattered groceries had been photographed as evidence and then collected. The street had been cleared of emergency vehicles, and the neighbors had gradually returned to their houses. I can't believe that just happened, Tasha said, sitting heavily on their porch swing. In our own driveway, after 8 years of living here. Marcus sat beside her, pulling her close. I'm so sorry I wasn't here sooner. If I had left work even 5 minutes earlier. You can't think like that, Tasha interrupted. You arrived exactly when you needed to. If you had been here earlier, the situation might have escalated even faster. They sat in silence for a moment, processing the magnitude of what had occurred. Their quiet suburban street looked exactly as it had that morning. Well-maintained lawns, tasteful landscaping, the kind of neighborhood where the biggest controversy was usually about holiday decorations or dog waste. But something fundamental had changed. Some illusion of safety and belonging that Tasha wasn't sure could ever be fully restored. What do we do now? She asked. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. We press charges. We make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. And we decide whether we still want to live in a community where something like this is possible. The next morning brought a flood of phone calls, emails, and unexpected visitors. The video Sarah Goldstein had recorded had somehow made its way to social media, where it was spreading rapidly. By noon, reporters from 3 different news stations had knocked on their door, and Tasha's principal's office was fielding calls from parents and community members expressing their support. The HOA board called an emergency meeting for that evening, promising a full investigation into how Patricia Henderson had been allowed to carry a weapon while representing the organization. The county prosecutor's office reached out to discuss the charges they were preparing to file. And Maya, their 13-year-old daughter, came home from school with stories of classmates who had seen the news coverage and wanted to know if her mom was okay. The emergency HOA meeting was standing room only. Tasha and Marcus arrived to find their neighbors filling the community center, along with people they didn't recognize from other parts of town who had come to show support. The board members looked uncomfortable and defensive, clearly unprepared for the level of scrutiny their organization was now facing. Board President Robert Chen, David Chen's father, called the meeting to order with a grim expression. We're here tonight to address the serious incident that occurred yesterday evening involving our community safety officer, Patricia Henderson. He went on to explain that Henderson had been immediately terminated from her position, that the HOA had never authorized its officers to carry weapons, and that they were implementing new training and oversight procedures to prevent similar incidents. But the crowd wasn't satisfied with bureaucratic responses. Person after person stood up to express their outrage, their disappointment, and their demand for more substantial changes. Sarah Goldstein spoke passionately about the need to examine the underlying attitudes that had made Patricia's actions possible. David Chen, speaking as both a board member's son and a public defender, talked about the legal implications of what had occurred. When Tasha finally stood to address the crowd, the room fell silent. She had spent the day thinking about what she wanted to say, how she wanted to use this moment to create something positive from the trauma she had experienced. I've lived in this community for 8 years, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the packed room. I've tried to be a good neighbor, a positive presence, someone who contributes to making Willowbrook Estates a better place for everyone. I've hosted neighborhood barbecues. I've volunteered for community events. I've worked to build relationships across racial and cultural lines." She paused, looking around the room at faces both familiar and unknown. "What happened to me yesterday wasn't just about one person's prejudice or mental instability. It was about a system that gave someone the authority to police this community without proper training, oversight, or accountability. It was about assumptions that are made about who belongs and who doesn't, based on the color of their skin." The room was absolutely silent, every person hanging on her words. "I don't want Patricia Henderson's life to be destroyed by this," Tasha continued. "I want her to get the help she clearly needs. But I also want to make sure that what happened to me never happens to anyone else. Not here. Not anywhere." She outlined a series of proposals: mandatory diversity training for all HOA officers, community oversight of security policies, regular town halls to address concerns and build understanding between different groups, and a formal partnership with local law enforcement to ensure proper procedures were followed. When she finished speaking, the applause was thunderous and sustained. Person after person approached her afterward, expressing support, sharing their own experiences with discrimination, and offering to help implement the changes she had proposed. 6 months later, Tasha stood in the same community center, but the atmosphere was completely different. The room was decorated with banners celebrating the neighborhood's diversity, and the crowd was there for a much happier occasion: the first annual Willowbrook Estates Unity Festival. Children of all backgrounds played together in the courtyard outside, while their parents shared food from different cultures and traditions. The HOA had not only implemented all of Tasha's recommendations, but had gone beyond them, establishing a community scholarship fund for local students and partnering with the school district to provide after-school programs for working families. Patricia Henderson had been sentenced to 2 years of probation, mandatory psychological counseling, and 500 hours of community service, which she was completing by working with a local organization that promoted racial understanding and reconciliation. She had written a letter of apology to Tasha, taking full responsibility for her actions and expressing her commitment to making amends. As Tasha watched her neighbors, all of her neighbors, celebrating together, she felt a complex mix of emotions. The trauma of that October evening would never completely fade, and she would always carry the memory of standing in her own driveway with a gun pointed at her chest. But from that darkness had emerged something unexpected: a community that was stronger, more unified, and more committed to justice than it had ever been before. Marcus appeared at her side, carrying 2 plates of food from the potluck buffet. "Penny for your thoughts." "I was just thinking about how strange life is," Tasha replied, accepting the plate with a grateful smile. "How something so awful can lead to something so beautiful. 6 months ago, I wasn't sure I wanted to keep living here. Now, I can't imagine being anywhere else." Maya ran up to them, her face flushed with excitement from playing with her friends. "Mom, Mrs. Rodriguez wants to know if you'll help her daughter with her college application essays. She says you're the best principal in the city." Tasha laughed, the sound carrying across the courtyard and mixing with the laughter of dozens of other families. "Tell her I'd be happy to help." As the sun set over Willowbrook Estates, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, Tasha Williams stood surrounded by her community, her real community, the one that had emerged from crisis stronger and more united than before. The groceries she had been carrying that terrible October evening had long since been replaced. But the fruit of that experience, the growth, the understanding, the commitment to justice, would nourish this neighborhood for years to come. The streetlights began to flicker on, just as they had that night 6 months ago. But now they illuminated something entirely different: not fear and division, but hope and unity. Not a community torn apart by prejudice, but one brought together by the courage to confront its demons and emerge better than before. And in that soft evening light, Tasha Williams, educator, neighbor, survivor, and catalyst for change, knew that she was exactly where she belonged,